Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time into the heart of the medieval world. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a bustling town square, surrounded by towering stone castles and dense forests. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and burning wood, while horses trot by carrying merchants laden with goods. In the distance, you can hear the rhythmic clinking of hammers on metal as blacksmiths work their forges. But here's the kicker: you probably wouldn't survive this world for long. The harsh conditions, diseases, and constant threat of war meant only the cleverest survived. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can see just how far this journey goes. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, we'll uncover unexpected inventions from the Middle Ages that you probably didn't know changed the course of history. Things you wouldn't think twice about today, but once they were the very foundation of survival, progress, and power. Let's begin. The evolution of medieval bridges, engineering marvels that changed transportation. The origins of medieval bridge building stretch back to ancient times, but it is during the Middle Ages that significant strides were made in bridging the gaps that divided communities, trade routes, and even entire kingdoms. Imagine walking along the edge of a river in medieval Europe, where the sight of crossing was often a treacherous ordeal. Rivers, for all their vital resources and trade value, were major obstacles to communication, transportation, and strategic military movement. The early medieval period, following the decline of the Roman Empire, saw a regression in technological advancements, and the art of bridge building was no exception. The Romans, renowned for their engineering feats, had created stone bridges that spanned vast stretches of water with unparalleled precision and durability. However, with the fall of the empire, many of these structures fell into disrepair, and the knowledge behind them was lost. Medieval societies had to reinvent bridge building techniques with the limited resources available to them. Wooden bridges were the first solution. These structures were relatively easy to build, as wood was abundant and the construction process simple. A log or series of logs could be placed across narrow rivers or streams to allow people and animals to pass. These makeshift bridges were, however, prone to the whims of nature. A strong flood could wash away a wooden bridge in mere hours, making them unreliable and temporary. For centuries, these fragile structures sufficed, but as trade routes expanded and the medieval economy flourished, the need for more permanent and sturdy crossings became apparent. The medieval world was beginning to emerge from the confines of the early Dark Ages, and with this shift came a renewed demand for infrastructure that could support growing cities, military needs, and expanding trade networks. Yet, even with the growing need, building permanent bridges came with challenges. Construction methods were primitive, and resources were scarce. While wealthy lords and kings might have had the means to finance grand projects, many small towns had to rely on communal effort, often building bridges as joint undertakings with local craftsmanship. Despite these limitations, medieval engineers and laborers began to learn from the past. They adapted Roman techniques, using a combination of timber, stone, and, eventually, a new material, mortar. Early efforts to build stone bridges began with small, modest structures. But over time, more ambitious designs emerged, leading to the development of stone arch bridges, which would become a hallmark of the period. Stone bridges were not only sturdier, but also better equipped to handle the increasing weight of traffic, which now included larger wagons, carts, and eventually military forces. The design of the stone arch was a significant breakthrough in bridge engineering by creating a series of arches that distributed the weight across multiple points. Engineers could build longer, more durable bridges that could withstand the pressures of both time and use. One such example of this early innovation is the stone bridge in Regensburg, Germany, which began construction in the 12th century. This bridge, built using Roman-inspired arch techniques, is one of the oldest surviving stone bridges from the medieval period. Its construction required advanced engineering knowledge and skill, including the use of intricate scaffolding, specialized stone cutting techniques, and the careful planning of the bridge's arches to ensure that the weight was evenly distributed. It stood as a symbol of how far bridge construction had advanced, combining Roman traditions with the new demands of medieval Europe. As towns began to develop around these new stone bridges, it became clear that infrastructure was no longer just a practical necessity. It was an emblem of power and prosperity. Kings and lords who funded the construction of bridges gained political leverage, as these structures not only facilitated travel and trade, but also served as visible symbols of their rule. The importance of bridges during this time cannot be overstated. They were vital in connecting disparate regions, helping facilitate the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural practices across Europe. The slow evolution of bridge building from simple wooden structures to more complex stone creations marked a turning point in how medieval societies organized themselves. But what drove this gradual shift from simple wooden crossings to grand stone bridges? Was it simply the need for more stability? Or were there other factors such as the economic boom or the rise of powerful kingdoms that spurred the development of these engineering marvels? Could it have been that the medieval mindset, which was deeply entwined with religious symbolism and social hierarchy, also saw the building of bridges as a literal and figurative connection to a greater power? As medieval society evolved, so too did its bridges, which became more than just practical structures. They were important social and political symbols that helped shape the development of Europe. As medieval society evolved, the demand for more robust, reliable infrastructure grew. The humble wooden bridges of the early medieval period were no longer sufficient for the expanding needs of trade, warfare, and urbanization. The growing economy, combined with the increasing wealth of certain regions, paved the way for a new era in bridge building. The rise of the stone bridge. Stone bridges represented a leap forward in both durability and design. While the construction of these bridges was a much more complex and expensive undertaking than the construction of wooden ones, the benefits were undeniable. Stone bridges were much more resistant to the elements, and their designs could support heavier loads, allowing the passage of larger and more complex forms of transportation. But stone bridges were not just an answer to practical concerns. They also became symbols of power and prestige. Kings and lords who financed the construction of stone bridges displayed their wealth and influence to the public, showcasing their ability to command vast resources for the common good. However, It wasn't just the elite who benefited. These bridges had far reaching implications for the common people as well. The emergence of advanced engineering techniques, the transition from wooden to stone bridges did not happen overnight. It required significant advancements in medieval engineering. The first stone bridges were generally rudimentary, but they laid the groundwork for more sophisticated designs that would appear in the centuries to follow. Early stone bridges were often simple in their design, typically featuring a single arch supported by piers. However, these structures were limited by the size of the spans that could be bridged with a single arch. Engineers and masons soon realized that a series of arches, or multi-span bridges, could be used to create longer spans without compromising the structural integrity of the bridge. By dividing the load between multiple arches, they were able to construct much longer and more reliable bridges that could withstand the wear and tear of everyday use. One of the most significant innovations of medieval bridge building was the use of mortar to hold stones together. Mortar allowed builders to create stronger, more stable structures by binding the individual stones. While early mortar was not as strong as modern cement, it was a critical development that made it possible to build larger and more durable bridges. The mortar used in the construction of medieval bridges was often made from lime, which, when mixed with sand, created a binding agent that helped solidify the structure. One of the most notable examples of this early stone bridge building technology is the Pont Saint-Benazet in Avignon, France, a bridge that was constructed during the 12th century. The Pont Saint-Benazet was built with a series of arches that spanned the Rhone River, and its construction was a monumental task that required the labor of hundreds of workers. The bridge's design was a significant achievement for its time and stood as a testament to the growing and engineering skills of the medieval period. The innovation of multi-span bridges had wide-reaching effects on both the physical landscape and society. The ability to bridge larger distances with stone structures enabled the development of trade routes that were previously impeded by natural barriers like rivers. This transformation in transportation had an impact on every level of society, from the nobility to the commoners. Bridges as instruments of power and prestige. In medieval Europe, the building of a stone bridge was more than just a construction project. It was an act of political and social significance. These bridges became tangible symbols of power, control, and connectivity for rulers. Constructing a bridge often had practical benefits, but it also served as a reminder of their reach and influence over the people and territories they governed. Take the case of the Charles Bridge in Prague, which was completed in the early 15th century. Commissioned by King Charles IV, this bridge not only served as a vital crossing over the Vltava River, but also as a powerful political symbol. The Charles Bridge was built as a physical representation of the king's authority over the lands of Bohemia. The bridge was adorned with statues of saints, reinforcing its religious significance, while the construction itself symbolized the strength and stability of Charles IV's reign. Other bridges, such as the London Bridge, played a similarly important role in their respective regions. London Bridge was crucial in connecting the bustling markets of London with the rest of England and Europe. Its importance as a trade hub meant that whoever controlled the bridge controlled a significant part of the kingdom's commerce. In some cases, bridges also had spiritual significance. Many medieval bridges were adorned with religious imagery, such as crosses or statues of saints. For example, the Pont Saint Benezet mentioned earlier was built with a chapel at the center of the bridge, and its religious symbolism reflected the medieval belief in divine protection over the infrastructure. Bridges and the growth of towns and trade. The construction of stone bridges not only connected distant lands, but also fueled the development of local towns and trade routes. Before bridges were built, river crossings were often dangerous or impractical, and traders had to seek alternative paths. This hindered the movement of goods, which in turn affected the growth of markets and cities. With the advent of stone bridges, trade became much more efficient. Goods could now flow freely between regions, and markets expanded as cities became more accessible to traders and merchants. The construction of bridges often led to the establishment of bridging towns, or settlements that grew around the bridge, providing services to travelers and traders. These towns became hubs of commerce, with inns, marketplaces, and workshops popping up to serve the increasing number of travelers passing through. One notable example of this is the medieval bridge of Cordoba, Spain, which crossed the Guadalquivir River. This bridge not only facilitated trade, but also enabled the Cordoba Caliphate to control the movement of goods and people in the region. Over time, towns that grew around such bridges became vital cultural and economic centers, with each settlement playing a significant role in the medieval economy. The creation of bridges also contributed to the rise of pilgrimage routes. Medieval pilgrims often had to travel long distances to reach sacred sites such as Santiago de Compostela or Jerusalem. With the construction of stone bridges, these journeys became more manageable, facilitating the movement of large numbers of pilgrims and ensuring that they could travel across Europe with greater ease. The long-term legacy of medieval bridges. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, the role of bridges in shaping European society was firmly established. The design and construction methods that were developed during the medieval period laid the foundation for the future of civil engineering. The techniques pioneered by medieval bridge builders were refined over the centuries and eventually became the basis for modern bridge building technology. The use of arches and mortar, for example, was carried forward into the Renaissance and beyond, influencing the design of bridges that spanned the globe during the Industrial Revolution and into the modern era. Even today, many medieval bridges still stand as enduring symbols of the ingenuity and perseverance of the engineers and laborers who constructed them. The Ponte Vecchio in Florence, Italy, and the stone bridge of Regensburg in Germany remain testaments to the skill and determination of the builders who created them. These bridges, though constructed centuries ago, still serve their intended purpose, standing as silent witnesses to the passage of time. As you consider these ancient structures, you might wonder how the people of the Middle Ages could have ever envisioned the lasting impact their bridges would have. Did they realize that the bridges they built would be used for centuries to come? Did they understand that their efforts would shape the very fabric of European society for generations? Perhaps, in their minds, the bridges were simply another tool to improve life in their time, an essential piece of the puzzle that would make their world more connected, more cohesive, and more enduring. But what, if anything, did they leave behind that we can still learn from today? By the time the Middle Ages came to a close, The bridges that spanned Europe's rivers had become much more than mere utilitarian structures. These stone marvels had transformed transportation, communication, and trade. However, their influence extended far beyond the medieval period, and their legacy is still evident in the bridges we cross today. The construction of medieval bridges marked a turning point in the development of Europe's infrastructure. They were not simply pathways over rivers, but symbols of power, prosperity, and progress. As we examine the final stages of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the bridges built during this time can be seen as the predecessors of the monumental engineering feats that define the modern world. The continued role of bridges in trade and warfare. In medieval Europe, bridges served both practical and strategic purposes. They connected distant towns and cities, fostering economic growth, and enabled the movement of armies during times of war. The strategic importance of bridges in military campaigns cannot be overstated. During the Hundred Years' War, for example, control over river crossings often dictated the outcome of battles. Armies that controlled the bridges could block their enemies' movements, and this advantage often played a decisive role in battles. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415, a key conflict in the Hundred Years' War, is a vivid example of how terrain, including rivers and bridges, affected the course of the war, though the battle itself did not involve a direct clash over a bridge. The control of strategic river crossings in nearby areas was critical to the movement of armies. The role of bridges as military assets continued to evolve in the centuries that followed. By the time of the Renaissance, the fortification of bridges had become a common military strategy. Many medieval bridges were designed with defensive features, such as drawbridges, towers, and gates, allowing them to be defended if the need arose. These defensive structures made it difficult for enemies to seize control of vital routes, ensuring the continued dominance of powerful lords and kings. In the centuries after the fall of the medieval period, bridges continued to play a significant role in military logistics. During the Napoleonic Wars, for instance, Napoleon Bonaparte's forces relied heavily on the network of bridges across Europe to move troops and supplies. The Pont Saint-Benezek, for example, though originally built during the medieval period, was an important bridge throughout the Renaissance and beyond, continuing to serve as a vital connection. Architectural and engineering influence in the Renaissance. By the time the Renaissance had fully unfolded, medieval bridges had set the stage for a revolution in civil engineering. The architectural innovations that medieval builders pioneered, such as the use of arches, mortar, and multi-span designs, were refined and incorporated into Renaissance bridge construction. One of the most significant advancements was the development of suspension bridges, which evolved from the arch designs of the medieval period. The Renaissance period saw the introduction of new materials and techniques, including iron, which allowed for more complex designs and larger spans. This innovation built upon the work of medieval engineers and set the stage for the modern bridges we use today. The Renaissance bridge also saw the rise of the bridge as an artistic and architectural symbol. Renaissance engineers, such as Leonardo da Vinci, were inspired by medieval designs, but sought to improve upon them through the application of scientific principles. These bridges were not only functional, but also celebrated for their beauty and harmony with the surrounding environment. One of the most notable examples is the Rialto Bridge in Venice, completed in 1591. While it was constructed after the medieval period, the Rialto Bridge was inspired by the arch designs and techniques that originated in medieval Europe. It stands as a testament to the continuity of medieval bridge building knowledge and its transition into the Renaissance. The Industrial Revolution, a leap beyond medieval bridge design. As Europe entered the Industrial Revolution, the role of medieval bridges shifted. While they had been vital for centuries, the Industrial Revolution ushered in new materials and technologies that would change the landscape of bridge building forever. The introduction of steel, followed by iron, completely transformed the scale and capacity of bridges. Engineers began to design bridges that were not only longer and stronger, but also faster and cheaper to build. The Iron Bridge in Shropshire, England, constructed in 1779, is one of the first examples of an entirely iron bridge and marks the dawn of a new era in bridge engineering. The Iron Bridge was an engineering marvel at the time and demonstrated the potential of metal as a material in construction. Though it was far more advanced than anything from the medieval period, it was still heavily influenced by medieval designs, especially in the use of arches for structural support. As industrialization progressed, bridges became essential for facilitating the rapid expansion of railways and automobile traffic. While medieval bridges had supported pedestrian and horse-drawn traffic, the new bridges of the industrial era had to accommodate heavier, faster forms of transportation. The expansion of railway lines and the development of new highways during the 19th century required the construction of even larger and more complex bridges, many of which would not have been possible without the foundational knowledge gained from medieval bridge building. Medieval bridges in the modern world. Today, many of the bridges built during the medieval period still stand, continuing to serve their purpose as critical components of modern infrastructure. For example, the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, Italy, still crosses the Arno River, though it has undergone various modifications over the centuries. Originally built in the 14th century, it remains an important part of the city's history and a testament to the lasting power of medieval engineering. Other medieval bridges, such as London Bridge, have been replaced or modified, but still maintain their historical significance. London Bridge, for example, has been rebuilt several times since the medieval period, but its legacy continues in the many versions that have spanned the Thames River. Today, it serves as a symbol of the City of London, and its legacy is preserved in the collective memory of the English people. The importance of medieval bridges is also reflected in modern engineering practices. Engineers and architects continue to study medieval bridge building techniques, drawing inspiration from the materials and methods used in their construction. For example, the medieval use of arches remains a cornerstone of modern bridge design, as arches continue to provide the most efficient way to distribute weight and resist pressure in bridge construction. Reflection on the legacy of medieval bridges. As we reflect on the enduring influence of medieval bridges, we are reminded that these structures were much more than just pieces of infrastructure. They were symbols of human ingenuity and determination, built by people who faced the challenges of their time and overcame them with the resources available to them. While the builders of medieval bridges could not have foreseen the far-reaching impact their creations would have, they understood one thing: Bridges were the key to connecting people and places, and those connections would shape the course of history, from the stone arches that crossed the rivers of medieval Europe to the steel and concrete giants that span our modern highways and railways. The legacy of medieval bridge building lives on. The ingenuity and vision of the medieval builders laid the groundwork for the bridges that continue to shape our world today. As we cross bridges in our own lives, whether physically or metaphorically, it's worth pausing to consider the unseen work that went into making these crossings possible. Every bridge, from the simplest log crossing to the most intricate modern designs, carries with it the legacy of centuries of human innovation and the desire to connect with others across the divides of time, space, and geography. So, the next time you cross a bridge, take a moment to think about the centuries of engineering, history, and human resilience that brought it into being. How much of today's world is built on the crossings that our medieval ancestors made, and how much of our future will depend on the bridges we build tomorrow? The knight's armor, an ingenious invention for survival. Imagine a medieval battlefield, a clash of steel and blood, the air thick with the noise of hooves pounding the earth and the screech of swords slicing through the air. In the midst of this chaos, a figure clad in gleaming armor charges forward. His armor, a marvel of medieval engineering, gleams under the sun, providing protection against the most brutal weapons of the time. This knight, or warrior, is not just a skilled fighter. He is protected by a carefully constructed suit of armor designed to ensure his survival in a world where death in battle was a constant threat. The evolution of the knight's armor was an intricate process, shaped by centuries of military needs, technological advancements, and the growing demands of warfare. In the early Middle Ages, knights and soldiers wore simple protective gear, leather, chainmail, or small pieces of plate armor, but these were only the beginnings of what would become one of the most iconic elements of medieval warfare. The full suit of armor, in its earliest form, was often made from simple materials like leather or iron. These early designs were primarily intended to protect the wearer from cuts and blows. However, as the nature of warfare changed and weapons evolved, so too did the need for more sophisticated protection. The first truly effective form of armor for knights was chainmail, a flexible, interwoven mesh of iron rings that was relatively light and offered good protection against slashing attacks. But chainmail, while effective in some respects, was less successful at defending against stabbing or thrusting weapons, such as swords or arrows. As the demand for better protection increased, armorers began developing new techniques and materials to meet the needs of the warrior. The development of plate armor marked a significant leap forward. Plates of metal, usually iron or steel, were shaped to cover vital parts of the body, providing protection against both cutting and stabbing weapons. These plate pieces were often combined with chainmail to offer flexibility and mobility, creating a hybrid form of protection that was much more effective in combat. But what triggered this shift toward heavier, more complete forms of armor? Was it simply a reaction to the changing nature of warfare, or was there an underlying demand for a more specialized form of protection that could be adapted to different combat situations? The answer lies in the nature of medieval warfare itself, which was becoming more complex and deadly. Early battles often involved smaller skirmishes between knights, but as kingdoms grew and armies became larger, the nature of combat changed. Bigger armies meant more intense battles, and the need for soldiers to survive longer engagements became critical. Knights, who had once fought in isolated duels or small groups, now had to contend with more organized, brutal warfare. As weapons grew more sophisticated, armor had to keep pace. Early knights and soldiers would wear whatever protection they could afford, often chainmail, a coat of leather, or simple tunics. However, with the rise of feudal systems and the growing wealth of certain lords, it became common for knights to equip themselves with full suits of plate armor. This transition from leather and chainmail to full metal plates was not only a technological development, but also a social and economic shift, one that marked the distinction between the lower classes of soldiers and the higher ranking knights. But just how did these plates evolve into the iconic suits of armor we associate with medieval knights today? Was the process purely practical, or did the armor also come to represent something much deeper, something symbolic about the role of knights and their place in society? By the High Middle Ages, the development of full plate armor was well underway. What had started as a simple suit of chainmail or leather was transformed into a sophisticated piece of personal engineering. The craft of making armor was intricate, requiring the skill of highly specialized armorers who were masters of their trade. It was not just a matter of protection, but of mobility, comfort, and aesthetic display. Each suit of armor had to balance all of these elements. At the heart of this transformation was the plate armor itself. The evolution of plate armor represented not only an advance in materials and design, but also an intricate understanding of how to create armor that could withstand the most lethal weapons of the time, while still allowing knights to move freely in battle. It was no longer just about protection. It was about creating a suit that would give the knight an edge in combat. Early plate armor, which first began to appear in the 13th century, consisted of simple metal plates designed to cover the most vulnerable parts of the body, primarily the chest, back, and legs. These early plates were often strapped or laced together, and their design was rudimentary compared to what would come later. The armor was functional, but it was heavy and cumbersome, which limited the knight's mobility. As the need for better protection grew, the armor itself evolved. By the late 14th century, full plate armor had become the norm for knights. This type of armor covered almost every part of the body, from the helmet down to the boots. It was made of large, flat plates that were riveted together to form a cohesive suit. The key to its design was that each plate was shaped to fit the contours of the body. Armorers began to shape these plates with more precision, curving the metal to better protect the knight's form and distribute the impact of blows. By the time of the 15th century, plate armor had evolved into a highly specialized, scientifically engineered protective suit. One of the most innovative aspects of plate armor was the development of the articulated joints. The armor must allow for full range of motion, even as it provided defense. This meant that armorers had to figure out how to make the plates flexible enough to allow for movement. The answer was the use of articulated joints, sections of armor that were connected by overlapping plates or metal rivets, allowing the knight to bend his arms and legs, move freely, and fight effectively. The introduction of articulated armor represented a crucial turning point in the history of armor design. Prior to this, Knights were often immobilized by their armor, limiting their ability to fight. With the new articulated plates, a knight could wield his sword, shield, and lance with greater ease, while remaining well protected against all but the most powerful of strikes. While the plate armor of the 14th and 15th centuries was designed to be as functional as possible, it also began to carry a symbolic weight. Armor, by now, was not just a piece of military equipment. It was a status symbol, a way for knights to display their wealth, rank, and power. Armor was often highly decorated, with intricate designs, heraldic symbols, and even religious motifs. The engraved designs on a knight's breastplate or the gilded accents on their helmet were not just for decoration, they also conveyed messages about the knight's allegiance, his personal values, and his social status. But how did these advanced designs come to be? What was the process by which these highly skilled armorers developed the art of forging and crafting these suits of protection? Was the development of such refined armor driven entirely by warfare, or was it also influenced by the changing social structure and the increasing importance of the knighthood as a cultural institution? The key to understanding the development of knightly armor lies in the highly structured guild system of the time. Armorers, like many craftsmen, belonged to guilds organizations that regulated their work, ensured quality, and provided training for apprentices. These guilds were often highly secretive and protective of their knowledge, which helped preserve the intricate techniques of armor making. Through these guilds, innovations in armor design spread across Europe, and armorers from different regions could exchange ideas and refine their craft. The functionality of the armor, a balance of protection and mobility. As armor evolved, it had to fulfill a complex set of needs for the knight. First and foremost, it needed to provide protection against a wide range of weapons, from swords and lances to arrows and blunt force trauma. Yet, protection was not enough. A knight had to be able to move, and that movement had to be fast, controlled, and effective in combat. Therefore, the design of the armor took into account the importance of balance. Armor that was too heavy would hinder movement and stamina, while armor that was too light would fail to offer sufficient defense. This balance between protection and mobility was achieved through a combination of engineering and trial and error. The development of the bassinet, a type of helmet, for example, was a key moment in the balance of armor design. The bassinet provided head protection without obstructing vision or hearing. Over time, additional helmets such as the Great Helm evolved, providing even greater protection for the head, though at the cost of reduced visibility and comfort. To counter this, ventilation holes and padding were introduced to make the helmets more bearable for extended periods of battle. In addition to mobility, the armor had to be highly customized for each knight. Unlike modern uniforms or gear, medieval plate armor was often individually crafted to fit the measurements of the knight wearing it. The knight's height, weight, and body type were all taken into account, ensuring that the suit of armor was not only protective, but also fit for combat effectiveness. The development of gauntlets, greaves, and sabaton armor for the hands, legs, and feet also played a crucial role in making the knight more capable on the battlefield. These pieces of armor were designed to offer full protection while still allowing for dexterity and control. Gauntlets were particularly significant, as they protected the hands while still allowing the knight to grip his sword or shield effectively. Sabaton protected the feet, ensuring that the knight could move without worrying about injury. The final piece of the puzzle was the sword and shield that knights used to defend themselves. Although sword technology evolved over time, the use of swords and shields in battle remained deeply rooted in medieval knighthood. The knight's armor was made with these tools in mind. The designs allowed for swift strikes with a sword, while the shield could be used to block incoming attacks. The combination of well-crafted armor and weapons made the medieval knight one of the most formidable warriors of his time. As the Middle Ages progressed, armor began to evolve from a mere tool of survival to a symbol of the knight's social standing, honor, and even spirituality. The knight's armor was no longer just a practical necessity, but also a reflection of the growing importance of chivalric codes and the medieval ideals of knighthood. While it remained a functional piece of equipment in battle, its significance transcended the battlefield, becoming a cultural artifact that represented the ideals of the warrior class. In the early medieval period, armor was primarily a means of protection. Yet as knights became more central to European warfare, particularly with the rise of feudal systems, their armor came to symbolize more than just their physical defenses. Knights were not only warriors, they were also bound by codes of honor, which influenced how they carried themselves, how they treated others, and, of course, how they adorned themselves in armor. Armor, as a result, became intricately linked to chivalric values, which emphasized courage, courtesy, and the defense of the weak. The connection between armor and knighthood can be seen in the elaborate decorations that adorned the armor of knights. These embellishments were more than just ornamental. They conveyed information about the knight's lineage, fealty, and personal identity. Heraldic devices, such as coats of arms and symbols, were often displayed prominently on a knight's armor. These symbols were part of the larger tradition of heraldry, which allowed knights to assert their nobility and establish their place in the social hierarchy. For instance, a knight's shield was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a reflection of his family crest, an emblem of his noble house that carried meaning far beyond the battlefield. A knight's armor would also feature inscribed symbols or mottos that conveyed his personal values or allegiance. The armor, thus, became a canvas for a knight's social identity, merging both practical necessity and symbolic representation. However, as the Renaissance loomed and the advent of gunpowder and firearms revolutionized the nature of warfare, the once innovative and indispensable knight's armor began to lose its place on the battlefield. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, firearms and artillery were far more effective at penetrating armor, rendering the traditional full suit of armor obsolete. Yet, the legacy of armor persisted far beyond its functional use. The decline of the knightly armor in combat, the shift from traditional melee combat to more ranged forms of warfare, due in large part to the development of firearms, rendered plate armor less effective. The muskets, arquebuses, and cannons of the Renaissance could easily pierce the thickest metal plates, making the elaborate suits of armor that had once been so effective in hand-to-hand combat less viable in modern battles. However, even as armor became less practical in the field of combat, its cultural significance continued to thrive. In tournaments where knights competed for honor and prestige, armor remained a central element of the display of skill and bravery. The jousting tournaments, which were organized across Europe, were as much about the spectacle of knightly prowess as they were about actual combat. These tournaments allowed knights to display their elaborate armor and demonstrate their martial abilities in a controlled, less deadly environment. The tournament armor that emerged in the late Middle Ages was often far more decorated than combat armor. It was designed to be visually striking, often adorned with gold leaf, colored fabrics, and heraldic symbols that would capture the attention of spectators. This ornate armor served both as a tool for personal protection and a means of displaying one's wealth, nobility, and martial prowess to the public. Even as firearms dominated the battlefield, knights continued to participate in tournaments where their armor served as both a personal symbol and a functional tool in these non-lethal competitions. Armor at these events became a fashion statement, showcasing a knight's wealth and prestige. In this sense, the decline of knightly armor in warfare was not so much the end of its cultural importance, but rather a transformation of its role into the arena of public display. The final blow to the armor's dominance in battle came with the advances in military technology and tactics during the early modern period. As professional armies began to rise, the traditional role of the mounted knight with his heavy plate armor dwindled. Instead, pikemen, archers, and firearms began to take precedence on the battlefield. Armor as a cultural symbol. The role of armor in art and literature. Though it lost its role in active warfare, knightly armor remained a potent symbol of the medieval chivalric ideal. Literature, art, and even statecraft would continue to romanticize the image of the armored knight. Chivalric romances, such as the tales of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, continued to portray knights in their splendid armor, battling evil forces to uphold justice and honor. The armor in these stories became symbolic of the virtues that the medieval knight was believed to represent: courage, honor, and loyalty. The image of the knight in shining armor became emblematic of not just an idealized past, but also a way to frame notions of nobility, leadership, and honor in the centuries to come. The Renaissance, with its revival of classical ideals, contributed to the romanticization of knights and their armor, as the medieval period came to be seen as a time of noble heroism and moral purity. This notion would resonate throughout Western culture, fueling ideas of the noble warrior in both popular and elite literature. Armor also retained a lasting influence in visual art. Many Renaissance artists, like Albrecht Dürer and Hans Holbein, painted knights in full armor, not just to depict military life, but also to capture the ideals of nobility and virtue. These depictions preserved the image of the knight's armor as an enduring symbol of strength, honor, and timeless bravery. As a result, even as armor became obsolete in practical terms, it lived on in modern-day culture, heraldry, jousting, and even modern depictions of knights in films, novels, and games continue to celebrate the imagery of the armored warrior. The legend of the knight in shining armor, immortalized in stories from the Middle Ages to today, remains a potent cultural symbol of heroism and the ideals of chivalric life. The enduring legacy of armor, a timeless icon of the Middle Ages. Despite the practical decline of medieval armor in warfare, its legacy endures. Today, knights' armor is preserved in museums, where visitors can marvel at the engineering prowess of medieval armorers and the skill that went into creating these life-saving suits. Armor also remains a symbol of the medieval knight's enduring qualities: honor, courage, and the ability to face adversity head on. The medieval knight's armor serves as a bridge between the past and present, connecting us with a time when warriors fought not just with weapons, but with a code of conduct that shaped their actions both on and off the battlefield. Today, the armor of knights is a window into the complex world of medieval warfare, culture, and society, a reminder of the ingenuity, strength, and ideals that defined an era. So, as you reflect on the knight's armor, think about the delicate balance between survival, status, and symbolism that these suits represented. What did it take to be a knight, and how did their armor define who they were, both in battle and in the courts of Europe? And, perhaps most importantly, how has the armor of the past continued to shape our vision of the ideal warrior today? The first mechanical clock. How time changed forever in the Middle Ages. Imagine standing in a medieval town square. The sun is barely rising. The air is crisp with morning dew, and the hum of life is just beginning to stir. The market stalls are being set up, the streets slowly filling with merchants, farmers, and craftsmen. As you walk through the narrow cobblestone paths, you hear the distant clang of a bell ringing from the town's church tower. The bell tolls, marking the hour. For centuries, societies have relied on the natural rhythms of day and night to mark the passage of time. Sunlight and the changing seasons were the primary indicators, and they governed the lives of people, especially in rural areas. But as medieval Europe evolved, so too did the need for more precise ways to track time. Timekeeping became a growing concern, especially with the rise of monasteries, the growth of towns, and the increasing demands of trade and commerce. The first truly mechanical clocks began to appear in the late 13th century, marking the start of a revolution in how people experienced time. These clocks didn't rely on the movement of the sun or the stars. Instead, they were powered by gears and weights, creating a much more precise and reliable means of keeping track of hours and minutes. Before mechanical clocks, people used sundials during the day and water clocks or hourglasses to measure time at night. However, these methods were far from accurate, particularly on cloudy days or during the night. A mechanical clock, using the power of geared machinery, represented a leap forward in engineering, making it possible to track time consistently regardless of the weather or the position of the sun. The development of mechanical clocks was driven by the church, the center of intellectual and social life in medieval Europe. Monasteries and convents needed precise timekeeping for their liturgical practices, which involved regular prayers throughout the day and night. Without an accurate clock, it would have been impossible to maintain a schedule for prayer, particularly during the nighttime vigils. In the early days, these monastic clocks were extremely basic. They simply channeled mechanical power to move a bell, which rang at prescribed intervals. These bells were a sign to the monks and the surrounding community that it was time for a certain activity, whether it was prayer, work, or rest. But as the demand for timekeeping grew, so did the complexity and functionality of these clocks. In some of the earliest examples, the clock was merely a way to toll the hours, often marking the hour with a bell or gong. These bells were loud and could be heard across long distances, so they became integral to community life, signaling to everyone in the town when it was time to begin their daily chores, attend church, or rest. Yet, as towns grew, there was increasing demand for a more accurate and consistent way of tracking time, one that would go beyond the simple toll of a bell. But how did these early clocks function, and what technological innovations allowed for this drastic shift in the way people measured time? What was the driving force behind the need for a mechanical clock, and how did it change the way medieval society functioned? To answer these questions, we need to look at the technological advancements and the people who made it possible. In the late 13th century, the first mechanical clocks were developed in Europe, particularly in Italy and England. These clocks were powered by a weight-driven mechanism where weights would pull on a system of gears, turning them and moving the hands of the clock. This system was incredibly simple by today's standards, but it was revolutionary for its time. It allowed for a much more reliable and consistent measure of time than any previous device. But who were the inventors and engineers behind these early mechanical clocks? And what did they stand to gain from creating such a complex device? Was it driven by the demands of the religious world, or was there something more to it? As the 13th century unfolded, the first mechanical clocks began to emerge from the monasteries and cathedrals of Europe. These early devices, while rudimentary by modern standards, represented a dramatic shift in how people experienced and interacted with time. Unlike the sun or the stars, which were subject to the vagaries of weather and seasons, the mechanical clock was a man-made creation, governed by gears and weights that allowed time to be measured with increasing precision. The first of these clocks were incredibly basic. They had no hands or faces as we think of today. Instead, they were designed to ring a bell at regular intervals, marking the hours for the monks who lived by a strict schedule of prayers, meals, and work. These early bell tower clocks were monumental, with the sound of the bell echoing throughout the town, guiding not only the monks, but also the townspeople in their daily routines. However, these early clocks were far from precise by modern standards. They were often plagued by inaccuracies, with some losing or gaining time over the course of a day. They also needed to be wound frequently, and their mechanisms were limited in their ability to handle complex time calculations. Yet, despite their imperfections, they represented a new dawn for humanity, allowing society to operate on a unified, regular schedule rather than relying on the unpredictable movement of the sun or the changing seasons. These early mechanical clocks were powered by weight-driven systems, a technology borrowed from ancient water clocks and astronomical devices. A weight would gradually descend, pulling a set of gears that drove the clock's movement. The escapement mechanism was a critical development that allowed the clock to measure time in regular intervals. The escapement limited the movement of the gears, making sure the clock didn't run too fast or too slow. This marked the first time in history that humans had a mechanical means of regulating time with anything close to precision. But what was the driving force behind the need for such a device in the first place? Why did the church, with its vast influence, support the development of mechanical clocks? The answer lies in the religious and social structures of the time. Monasteries were places of contemplation and prayer, where the daily lives of monks were structured around the divine office, a set of prayers recited at specific times of the day. In this context, timekeeping became a critical tool for religious life. Monks were required to pray at certain hours, and maintaining a regular schedule was essential to their duties. The bells of the mechanical clock helped regulate this schedule, ensuring that monks could adhere to the precise timing required for their religious duties. The clocks in church towers, often powered by complex gears and weights, became the pulse of medieval society, guiding the rhythms of life for both the clergy and the common people. At the same time, the need for mechanical clocks was also driven by the rise of trade and commerce. As towns grew and marketplaces expanded, people needed reliable ways to measure time for business transactions. The merchant class was rapidly developing, and with them, the need for standardized schedules, market hours, and trade deadlines. Mechanical clocks, though still primitive, began to be installed in town squares and markets, helping to regulate business and facilitate commerce. The development of the mechanical clock also reflected a broader shift in medieval Europe, the increasing urbanization of society. In the past, villages and small towns had functioned in a world where time was less structured. But as cities grew and became more interconnected, the need for a unified system of timekeeping became more apparent. Mechanical clocks provided that system, bringing a sense of order and structure to a chaotic and rapidly changing world. As these early clocks continued to develop, craftsmanship and innovation took center stage. By the 14th century, clockmakers were experimenting with more advanced designs, some adding hands to display the time, and others making more intricate gears to increase precision. The clocks became focal points in public life, symbolizing the technological progress of the era and contributing to the growing scientific knowledge of the time. But as the designs became more complex, the question arose: who had the knowledge and resources to build these clocks? Were they just a tool for the elite and the religious classes? Or could they be used for the benefit of the common people as well? By the 15th century, clockmakers began to move away from the exclusive control of the church and nobility, and the first public clocks began to appear in town squares across Europe. These public clocks were often built by skilled artisans who were part of guilds that regulated the trade of clockmaking. The rise of these guilds ensured that knowledge of clockmaking spread beyond the monasteries and cathedrals, making mechanical clocks more accessible to a broader range of people. As the mechanical clock became more accurate and widespread, it began to reshape society's relationship with time. The very idea of time itself was changing. The rise of the mechanical clock contributed to the development of the concept of punctuality, and people began to see time not just as a natural rhythm to follow, but as a measurable, quantifiable commodity. It was no longer enough to simply wake up with the sun or eat when the bell rang. Time had become a standardized, universal force that governed every aspect of daily life. But as the clock evolved, it also raised important philosophical questions. What does it mean to control time? Was humanity's increasing reliance on mechanical clocks an indication of a desire for order, or did it represent something deeper, a desire to impose structure on a chaotic world? Would these early clocks eventually transform the very fabric of society? The shift in how time was measured would come to influence everything from work schedules to the modern concept of productivity, which continues to shape our world today. By the end of the Middle Ages, the mechanical clock had already begun to change the way medieval society experienced time. But its influence was just beginning. The evolution of the mechanical clock was not just a matter of scientific progress, it represented a fundamental shift in how people understood the world around them. Time was no longer an abstract concept governed by the sun or the stars. It had become a measurable, standardized force that shaped every aspect of daily life. In the centuries following the introduction of the mechanical clock, its use spread rapidly. By the 16th and 17th centuries, clock towers were common in town squares, and private clocks began to appear in homes and businesses across Europe. These clocks were not just tools for regulating daily activities, they became symbols of modernity and progress. The rise of clockmaking as a craft helped drive advancements in both engineering and mathematics, as clockmakers developed increasingly sophisticated mechanisms to improve the accuracy and reliability of their timepieces. The mechanical clock also had a profound impact on society's perception of time. Prior to the invention of mechanical clocks, people in medieval Europe relied on the natural rhythms of the day's sunrise, sunset, and the changing seasons to guide their actions. Time was an organic experience, measured by biological rhythms and the changing light of day. But with the advent of the mechanical clock, time became a tangible, calculable unit that could be manipulated and controlled. This transformation marked the beginning of time as a commodity, a finite resource that could be measured, scheduled, and regulated. The birth of the Industrial Revolution. The rise of the mechanical clock was closely tied to the social and economic changes that would eventually lead to the Industrial Revolution. As mechanical clocks became more common, they laid the groundwork for an era in which time management would become a cornerstone of economic activity. The concept of punctuality gained importance, especially in growing urban centers, where people needed to coordinate their work hours, market schedules, and trade transactions. The development of precise timekeeping, made possible by mechanical clocks, paved the way for the rise of factory systems in the 18th century. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution, labor became increasingly regimented, and the timing of work became a key factor in productivity. Factory owners relied on precise timekeeping to ensure that workers adhered to strict schedules, maximizing output during fixed hours. The invention of the mechanical clock had thus begun to influence work-life balance, or, as it often was in industrializing societies, the lack of balance. This time-centric approach to work became deeply embedded in the fabric of industrial society. In the factory system, the worker's day was now divided into strict shifts, with the sound of a bell or a whistle marking the beginning and end of each workday. The concept of the 9-to-5 workday was born out of this need to regiment time and regulate the labor force. It was no longer just about working until sunset, but about meeting the demands of a mechanized economy driven by precise, predictable time schedules. The rise of time zones, too, can be traced back to the proliferation of mechanical clocks. As railroad networks expanded in the 19th and 18th century, trains needed to be scheduled with accuracy, ensuring they could arrive at the right station at the right time. To avoid confusion, the need for a standardized system of time emerged, which led to the eventual adoption of time zones across the world. This development was a direct result of the mechanical clock's ability to divide the day into standardized units, creating a globally synchronized experience of time. The influence on culture and society. beyond the workplace. The mechanical clock also reshaped the broader cultural landscape. As time became more quantified, it started to govern how people perceived their lives. Leisure and entertainment began to be measured in hours and minutes, and people found themselves increasingly focused on the efficient use of their time. The once organic flow of daily life, tied to the cycles of nature, was gradually replaced by an artificial, mechanical rhythm. People began to view time not as a natural resource, but as a commodity to be spent, saved, or wasted. As societies became more urbanized, the mechanical clock became a constant presence in daily life. Town halls, churches, and marketplaces all featured large, public clocks, which allowed the entire community to be governed by a shared sense of time. The clock became a social tool, helping to synchronize the activities of an entire town, allowing individuals to coordinate meetings, work schedules, and even social events. The rise of the public clock meant that no one could escape the influence of time. It governed both public and private life. At the same time, clocks began to evolve into objects of aesthetic value. By the 17th and 18th centuries, clocks were not just functional, they were works of art. Ornate, decorative clocks, often made of precious metals and intricate engravings, were displayed in the homes of the wealthy, becoming symbols of status and refinement. The development of the pocket watch, a portable version of the mechanical clock, became a fashionable accessory among the aristocracy, further cementing time's role as an important aspect of social identity. The modern world and the persistence of mechanical clocks. Today, while the mechanical clock is no longer the primary method for keeping time, digital clocks and atomic clocks have replaced the old-fashioned gears and weights. The legacy of the mechanical clock continues to influence modern society. The very idea of standardized time, of dividing the day into precise units, is still based on the principles established by the early mechanical clocks. In fact, much of our modern concept of time, from work hours to leisure time, and even to the way we structure our entire lives, is a direct descendant of that shift in the Middle Ages, when mechanical clocks first allowed humans to measure time with precision. The rise of global synchronization via time zones, the work week, and productivity schedules can be traced back to that early leap in technology. The mechanical clock, in many ways, laid the groundwork for the modern world, shaping everything from our daily routines to our understanding of time management. Interestingly, even though clocks are now digital, the structure of time remains much the same. The traditional 12-hour clock face, with its clock hands sweeping around the face, is still a dominant design in watches, smartphones, and even public clocks, serving as a reminder of the medieval engineers who first brought time under control. The ticking of a clock, whether mechanical or digital, continues to represent our ongoing relationship with time, a relationship that was revolutionized by the advent of the first mechanical clocks centuries ago. As we move into the future, time will undoubtedly continue to evolve in new and fascinating ways. But no matter how much technology advances, the legacy of the first mechanical clock will always remain a defining moment in human history. The moment when we began to control time itself. The medieval plow, how agricultural innovations transformed Europe. Imagine stepping into the lush, fertile fields of medieval Europe. The early morning light filters through the mist, and farmers are already busy at work. But instead of using simple tools like hoes or digging sticks, they are operating large, advanced plowing machines. These are not just tools, they are the engines of transformation that have the potential to change the face of Europe forever. In an era when food production was a matter of life and death, the plow becomes an essential part of life, turning the soil to yield more crops and feed larger populations. The development of the medieval plow is one of the great yet often overlooked revolutions in European history. This simple tool, which would evolve over time from a basic scratching implement into a heavy, iron plated machine, would radically alter agricultural productivity and, by extension, society itself. Before the rise of the medieval plow, early European farmers used light, inefficient plows that were little more than wooden implements dragged through the soil by oxen or horses. These early plows were primarily used in the warmer regions of Europe, where the soil was more forgiving. However, the soils of northern Europe, particularly those in regions like the lowlands of England, France, and Germany, were much heavier and more difficult to cultivate. These clay-heavy soils required more advanced tools if they were to be turned effectively. The solution came in the form of the heavy plow, a larger, more robust design that incorporated a plowshare made from iron. This new design was capable of cutting into and turning over the stubborn, clay-laden soil of northern Europe. It was a game changer, allowing farmers to plow deeper and break through the hard-packed soil, making it easier to plant and grow crops. By the 9th and 10th centuries, the heavy plow had begun to spread across Europe, replacing the simpler, light plows of the earlier period. The advent of the iron plowshare, which was stronger and more durable than previous materials, allowed plows to dig into soil that had been previously unworkable. This was particularly significant in the northern and eastern parts of Europe, where the climate and soil types made traditional farming techniques almost impossible. But how did the medieval plow differ from the earlier, simpler designs? What made it such a powerful tool in shaping European agriculture, and why did it spread so quickly across the continent? The key lies in its structural design and the advancements in agricultural knowledge during the early medieval period. By the 10th century, the heavy plow had become an integral part of the farming landscape across northern Europe. Its design, which included a large iron plowshare, a moldboard, the part of the plow that turns the soil, and a coulter, a sharp blade used to cut into the earth, allowed farmers to work the soil much more efficiently. This was a drastic improvement over earlier plows, which could only scratch the surface of the earth or cut through lighter, sandy soils. The rise of the heavy plow had profound implications for agriculture, but also for medieval society as a whole. To understand its importance, we must first examine how it transformed farming techniques and allowed Europe to sustain an ever-growing population. The heavy plow was specifically suited to the heavy, clay soils of northern Europe, especially in regions like Flanders, Germany, and parts of France. These soils, known for their stiffness and high clay content, could not be worked by the simpler, earlier plows. The heavy plow, with its iron share, was able to penetrate the soil, break it up, and turn it over in such a way that it became more suitable for planting. This was essential for making the most of the land, especially in regions where farming was the main source of sustenance. Unlike earlier plows, which had only scratched the surface of the earth, The heavy plow dug deeper and turned the soil more effectively, mixing organic matter into the ground. This process of soil aeration increased the fertility of the land, making it possible to grow a wider variety of crops. Not only could wheat, barley, and rye be cultivated more effectively, but it also allowed for the cultivation of oats and vegetables, increasing the diversity of the medieval diet. This increase in agricultural productivity had far reaching effects. Crop yields in the regions where the heavy plow was introduced increased dramatically, allowing for surplus production. Surpluses meant that farmers could store excess crops for the winter or trade them with neighboring communities. This led to the rise of more complex economies and the development of trade networks across Europe. The ability to produce more food also supported the growth of urban areas. As agricultural productivity increased, more people could be fed, leading to the growth of towns and cities in many parts of Europe, particularly in the Low Countries and the Rhine Valley. The rise of towns marked the beginning of the commercial revolution, which would eventually lead to the growth of market economies and a more interconnected European world. The introduction of the heavy plow allowed for the cultivation of land that had once been considered unsuitable for farming. It transformed what were once wild or poorly farmed areas into fertile farmland, unlocking the potential for new agricultural regions to thrive. The expansion of arable land meant that medieval Europe could sustain larger populations, supporting the rise of feudal societies and expanding the power and wealth of monarchs and landowners. At the same time, the heavy plow required greater investment in both labor and land. The plows themselves were expensive, requiring high-quality iron for the plowshares and skilled labor to build them. This meant that wealthier landowners and monarchs were more likely to adopt the heavy plow, as they could afford both the equipment and the workers needed to operate it. As a result, the plow also contributed to the development of feudalism. Larger landowners, who could afford the new equipment and labor, began to exert greater control over the land. Peasants were often employed to work the land, paying rents and taxes to the landowners in exchange for the right to farm. This created a feudal system where landowners became more powerful, controlling vast swaths of productive farmland, while peasants labored to sustain the economy. But how did the spread of the heavy plow come about? How did such a significant agricultural innovation spread throughout Europe? And what role did the social and political climate play in its success? The key to this transformation was the growth of trade networks across Europe. As towns and cities developed, farmers and artisans began to share ideas, technologies, and techniques. The spread of the heavy plow was part of this broader exchange of knowledge. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the plow had spread from the Low Countries to Germany, and from there to France and England. The design of the plow became more refined over time, with improvements made to the size and efficiency of the machine, as well as the materials used in its construction. The heavy plow also coincided with other innovations in medieval farming, such as the three-field system. This system, which divided land into three parts, one for planting wheat, one for planting barley or rye, and one for fallow, allowed for the rotation of crops and helped maintain soil fertility. The heavy plow and the three-field system worked in tandem to improve the efficiency of farming and maximize yields, ensuring that medieval society could sustain its growing populations. As more land became productive, The feudal economy also expanded. Agricultural surpluses allowed for the rise of towns and cities, where merchants and artisans could exchange goods and services. The heavy plow, along with other medieval farming innovations, played a crucial role in facilitating this expansion of urban centers and trade. A changing landscape, the long-term legacy of the medieval plow. The widespread use of the heavy plow had a lasting impact on European society. Over time, its effects on agricultural productivity and land use paved the way for new forms of social and political organization. As more food became available, the population grew, leading to the rise of more complex societies. Towns and cities became economic hubs, and the agricultural surplus allowed for specialization. More people could engage in trades and crafts, as fewer people were needed to work the land. In the long term, the agricultural innovations of the medieval period, especially the heavy plow, set the stage for the economic transformation that would characterize the Renaissance and later the Industrial Revolution. The ability to produce surplus food with greater efficiency allowed for the rise of capitalism, as individuals and families were able to accumulate wealth through the production and exchange of goods. The medieval plow, while simple in design, was a revolutionary tool that transformed European agriculture and society. It allowed the medieval world to feed more people, cultivate more land, and create more wealth. Its legacy is still felt today in the way we think about agriculture, food production, and the way societies organize themselves around the need for sustenance. The impact of the medieval plow cannot be overstated. It was a catalyst for agricultural revolution during the medieval period, laying the groundwork for the modern farming practices that we rely on today. Though centuries have passed since its introduction, the influence of the heavy plow is still felt in the way we approach land cultivation and agricultural technology. As the plow allowed for more efficient use of land, it contributed directly to the growth of societies, the rise of urban centers, and the foundation of the industrial economy. Its legacy is not confined to the Middle Ages, but has stretched into the modern world, influencing farming methods and land use practices that continue to shape global agriculture. The most direct impact of the medieval plow was on the increase in agricultural output. The plow enabled medieval farmers to cultivate previously difficult to work land, unlocking the potential of heavier clay soils in the northern European regions. This marked a sharp shift from the more limited, seasonal cultivation in earlier centuries, when farming practices were often constrained by the environment. The spread of the heavy plow allowed for greater land productivity, which in turn led to the production of surplus crops. Surplus meant that food could be stored, traded, and sold, contributing to economic growth in both rural and urban areas. Agricultural revolution and the rise of towns and cities. The rural economy of medieval Europe was transformed by the heavy plow, but its effects extended far beyond the farm. As agricultural output increased, so did the population. With more food available, people could settle in towns and cities, where they engaged in trades, crafts, and commerce. This process of urbanization accelerated during the Middle Ages, and the growth of medieval towns created a demand for goods that fueled an economic boom across the continent. In particular, marketplaces became central to the development of towns, where farmers, artisans, and traders exchanged goods and services. The agricultural surplus produced by the plow was crucial to sustaining these urban populations, and it helped to lay the foundation for the commercial revolution that would characterize the later Middle Ages and the Renaissance. As trade networks expanded, so too did the demand for agricultural goods, further boosting productivity and the role of the farmer in the broader economy. It is important to recognize that the plow was not just an isolated innovation. It was part of a larger series of agricultural advancements that included improvements in crop rotation, irrigation, and animal husbandry. When combined with the three-field system of crop rotation, which allowed for better soil management, the heavy plow ensured that land could be used more effectively. Year after year, this resulted in long-term agricultural sustainability that allowed medieval Europe to feed its growing population, leading to both economic stability and the expansion of empires. The plow and feudalism, shaping the medieval social structure. The introduction of the heavy plow also had a significant social impact, particularly in terms of the development of the feudal system. In feudal Europe, land was the main source of wealth, and the use of the heavy plow often fell to peasants or serfs, who worked the land in exchange for protection and the right to keep a portion of the crops they harvested. The plow, in this context, played a role in reinforcing the feudal order, as it was the landowners, often nobles, or the monarchy who could afford the plow and employed the labor to operate it. By increasing the productivity of land, the heavy plow also increased the wealth and power of the feudal lords who owned large estates. These lords not only gained economic power from the agricultural surpluses, but also exerted control over the peasant population, who were tied to the land and obligated to work it for their masters. The heavy plow, in this sense, contributed to the entrenchment of feudalism, which defined the political and economic system of medieval Europe for centuries. Transition to modern agriculture. Influence on the agricultural revolution. The medieval plow's legacy did not end with the fall of the feudal system or the rise of the Renaissance. The groundwork it laid for large-scale farming continued to influence European agricultural practices well into the modern period. By the 18th century, with the onset of the agricultural revolution, the need for efficient farming practices reached new heights. Agricultural practices such as crop rotation, selective breeding of animals, and the enclosure movement all built on the advancements made by medieval tools like the plow. In the 19th century, with the advent of industrialization, the medieval plow's influence could be seen in the development of mechanized farming equipment, including the tractor and steam-powered plows, the invention of iron plows in the 19th century, which allowed for even deeper penetration of soil, was the direct descendant of the medieval plow. These advancements in agricultural machinery helped propel farming into the modern era, transforming the landscape of agriculture and continuing the legacy of the heavy plow's ability to enhance productivity. The modern agricultural revolution brought forth innovations that mirrored the medieval advances in plowing. Plowing technology evolved from the heavy wooden plows of the past into mechanized machinery capable of working large expanses of land quickly and efficiently. This transformation in farming methods allowed for mass food production on a scale that medieval farmers could only dream of. With the development of modern equipment, such as the tractor, the concept of precision farming emerged. building on the principles of deep soil cultivation pioneered by the medieval plow. The plow and modern land use, connecting the past to the present. Even today, the principles of the medieval plow are evident in the way we approach land management and agriculture. Modern farming methods, while far more advanced, still rely on the basic concept of soil cultivation that was introduced by the heavy plow. The plow's influence can be seen in the tillage practices that are essential for preparing soil for planting crops. In fact, modern tractors and plowing equipment are the direct descendants of the medieval plow, continuing to use similar principles, such as the plowshare and moldboard, to turn the earth. The use of sophisticated plowing machines today, designed to break up compacted soil and improve soil aeration, still follows the principles established by medieval plowmakers. These modern machines ensure the continued efficiency of global agriculture, feeding billions and contributing to the economic viability of the world's food systems. Thus, the medieval plow continues to shape our understanding of farming and land use today, bridging the gap between medieval innovation and modern agricultural technology. The legacy of the medieval plow is also reflected in the way we manage soil health today. Sustainable farming practices, such as no-till farming, which aims to minimize soil disruption, can be traced back to the lessons learned from the early plowing techniques. By understanding the importance of maintaining soil structure and health, modern farmers continue the tradition of enhancing the land for future generations, a symbol of innovation and human resilience. Looking back, the heavy plow is a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience. It was an invention that not only changed the course of medieval Europe, but also laid the foundation for the agricultural world we know today. The plow's ability to transform poor, unproductive land into fertile ground for growing crops helped sustain the population and power the growth of civilizations. It allowed the medieval world to feed its people, and in doing so, it helped to form the foundation of the modern world. The story of the medieval plow is one of adaptation and progress, where a simple tool evolved over time to meet the ever-growing demands of an expanding population. Its impact on agriculture, society, and the environment is still being felt today, reminding us of the power of innovation and its enduring influence on human history. The printing press, revolutionizing knowledge and communication. Picture the medieval world, where knowledge is a rare commodity, hoarded by the elite, and only accessible to those in power or with the time to devote themselves to hand copying manuscripts. It's a world where books are extremely rare, costly, and painstakingly crafted by hand, often by monks in monasteries. The process of writing was slow, labor-intensive, and limited in its scope. Books were generally reserved for religious texts or works that could be afforded by the wealthy or the church. In this world, the idea of mass-producing books, of making written knowledge accessible to the masses, was revolutionary. The key to this transformation lay in a simple but groundbreaking invention, the printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 in Mainz, Germany. Gutenberg's press, powered by movable type, would forever change the way knowledge was disseminated and mark the beginning of the print revolution that would transform society. Before the printing press, manuscripts were copied by hand, which was an excruciatingly slow process. Monks in monasteries across Europe would spend months, sometimes years, working on a single manuscript, often in Latin, the language of the church, and scholarly texts. This not only limited the availability of books, but also made them expensive and out of reach for all but the wealthiest members of society. As a result, knowledge was tightly controlled by the church and the aristocracy. Gutenberg's printing press revolutionized this system by using a series of movable metal types to imprint text onto paper. This mechanical method allowed books to be produced much more quickly and at a fraction of the cost compared to traditional hand copying. For the first time, books could be mass produced, and their costs dropped dramatically, making written knowledge available to a broader audience. But how exactly did this new printing technology work, and why was it so groundbreaking? Gutenberg's press used movable type, meaning that individual characters' letters, numbers, punctuation could be arranged and rearranged for each page of text, as opposed to the previous method of carving each page into wood blocks. This made it far easier to produce books quickly and with consistent quality. Furthermore, paper, which was relatively inexpensive compared to the parchment used in earlier manuscripts, became the new medium, further lowering costs and expanding the availability of printed materials. As a result, Gutenberg's press began to change the landscape of knowledge and communication. What had once been a limited resource became an accessible treasure trove of ideas. Within a short period, books and pamphlets were no longer just for the wealthy. They could be found in towns, universities, and churches, and eventually in the hands of merchants, traders, and even ordinary people. But the real question is, what impact did this new invention have on the medieval world? Could one technology truly change the fabric of society? The answer, as we will see, is a resounding yes. The advent of the printing press marked the beginning of a new era in the history of knowledge and communication. Gutenberg's invention didn't just change how books were made, it fundamentally altered the way people accessed and shared information, sparking a transformation that would resonate throughout Europe and beyond. As printed books became more widely available, the rapid dissemination of ideas allowed knowledge to spread in ways that had previously been unimaginable. This revolution had profound implications, not only for scholars and the church, but for every level of society. One of the earliest and most profound effects of the printing press was on religion. The Bible, previously available only to the wealthy or the clergy, was now printed in the vernacular, the language of the common people. This was a radical shift. Prior to Gutenberg, most Bibles were handwritten in Latin, making them inaccessible to anyone who didn't understand the language of the church. The ability to print vernacular Bibles in languages like German, English, and French allowed ordinary people to read the scriptures for the first time in their own language. One of the most significant events to arise from the printing press was the Protestant Reformation, a religious and political movement spearheaded by Martin Luther. Luther, a German monk, famously nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church in 1517, criticizing the Catholic Church's practice of selling indulgences. His ideas were immediately spread throughout Europe, in part due to the efficiency and speed with which the printing press could reproduce his pamphlets and writings. Luther's translations of the Bible into German were printed and distributed widely, creating an intellectual and religious firestorm. The printing press, in essence, democratized knowledge, allowing the spread of ideas that had been suppressed or controlled for centuries. The Protestant Reformation was only one example of how the ability to print books and pamphlets allowed new ideas to spread quickly, challenging the authority of both the Catholic Church and the monarchy. As books became more affordable, literacy rates began to rise, leading to an intellectual awakening in the form of the Renaissance. The printing press made it possible to circulate scientific discoveries, philosophical texts, and literary works more rapidly than ever before, contributing to a rise in education and critical thinking. The role of print media during this period cannot be overstated. The ability to print not only books, but also pamphlets, newspapers, and leaflets meant that information could be shared across vast distances in a fraction of the time it once took. These printed materials played a key role in the formation of public opinion, allowing people to debate, question, and disseminate new ideas that would have otherwise been suppressed or ignored. Public figures like Luther, Machiavelli, and Erasmus were able to use print to influence society, expanding their ideas and philosophies beyond the limits of their local communities. Beyond religious and intellectual life, the printing press also had a significant impact on politics and government. Rulers and monarchs saw the potential of print to control narratives, spread royal decrees, and solidify their power. As a result, government publications became more common, and rulers began to recognize the importance of controlling printed media. This growing importance of printed materials helped to shape politics and ideologies across Europe, making the printing press a crucial tool for both reformers and authoritarians. In addition to religion and politics, the printing press also had a profound impact on the spread of scientific knowledge. The ability to distribute scientific works rapidly meant that discoveries could be shared across Europe. Figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Vesalius benefited from the printing press, as their revolutionary scientific ideas could now reach a much larger audience. The scientific revolution, which would unfold in the 16th and 17th centuries, was made possible, in part, by the spread of scientific texts that were printed and disseminated across Europe. The printing press also contributed to the growth of universities and scholarship. Before its invention, educational texts were rare and often extremely expensive. Students were limited in the amount of written material they had access to, and books were typically only found in monasteries or church libraries. But as books became cheaper and more abundant, universities were able to expand their curricula, and students had greater access to the works of ancient philosophers, scientists, and theologians. The revolution in education sparked by the printing press laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, a period of intellectual and cultural growth that would reshape Europe in the 18th century. But the printing press's effects were not limited to Europe. The invention of movable type soon spread across the globe, with Asia, Africa, and the Americas following suit. As printing technology spread, it transformed communication across the world, allowing for faster distribution of ideas and creating a more connected global society. The printing press also had a lasting impact on the development of literature. Writers no longer had to rely on hand copying their works or having them painstakingly transcribed. They could now publish books more quickly and affordably, leading to the growth of literature as a popular form of entertainment and intellectual pursuit. The rise of novels, pamphlets, poetry, and plays became more common as writers had access to the new print technology. This growth in literary culture allowed for the spread of the written word, leading to a flourishing of cultural expression and the rise of public intellectuals and literary figures. But as we look back on the transformative effects of the printing press, one question remains. Was the impact of the press entirely positive? While it undoubtedly contributed to intellectual and social progress, it also contributed to the spread of controversial ideas and dangerous ideologies, including religious extremism and political propaganda. How did the freedom of the press shape the balance of power in Europe? Were there unforeseen consequences of the rapid dissemination of information, and what role did printed books play in both democratizing knowledge and enabling censorship? As the centuries passed, the printing press proved to be far more than just an invention. It became the foundation for the modern world. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, it was already clear that this simple machine had transformed society in profound and enduring ways. The printing press not only democratized knowledge, it also accelerated the spread of new ideas, scientific breakthroughs, and philosophical debates. It was the birth of an information revolution, laying the groundwork for the developments that would characterize the Enlightenment, the rise of modern democracy, and the global connectivity that defines the 21st century. One of the most immediate and significant legacies of the printing press was its role in the Protestant Reformation. As Martin Luther and other reformers took advantage of the press to spread their theological ideas, the Catholic Church's authority was increasingly challenged. Luther's 95 Theses, printed and distributed widely, catalyzed a religious revolution that reshaped Europe. The Reformation fundamentally altered not only the Church, but also European politics and society, as Protestant and Catholic powers formed, leading to a century of religious conflict and, eventually, the creation of secular states that would become the foundation for modern political thought. The printing press also played a key role in the scientific revolution. Pioneers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton were able to share their discoveries with the broader world, challenging centuries-old beliefs about the cosmos, the Earth, and the nature of the universe. Their works, once confined to small, limited circles, could now reach scholars, philosophers, and thinkers across Europe. The reproducibility of scientific texts also ensured that their methods and theories were preserved for future generations, laying the groundwork for modern science. Moreover, the press enabled the development of scientific journals and academic publications that facilitated the exchange of ideas on a global scale. Knowledge was no longer confined to isolated scholars in monasteries or universities. It became a shared resource that could be debated, tested, and built upon. This shared knowledge helped establish the foundations of modern academic institutions and was instrumental in shaping the intellectual climate of the Enlightenment, where reason, individualism, and critical thinking came to the fore. The printing press's influence was not confined to religion and science. It also revolutionized politics and governance. With printed pamphlets and books, political ideas could spread rapidly, enabling thinkers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes to present their theories of government and human nature to wide audiences. This dissemination of political thought contributed to the development of democratic principles, eventually influencing the American Revolution and the French Revolution. both of which were driven by ideas first spread by the printing press. Additionally, the printing press became a cornerstone in the development of literature. Prior to its invention, literature was primarily confined to the elite, the nobility and clergy who could afford books. After the press, literature became more widely accessible, and printing allowed writers such as Shakespeare, Dante, and Cervantes to reach broader audiences. Novels, plays, and poetry became part of popular culture, and with it came the rise of the public intellectual. Writers now had an ability to shape public opinion, challenge social norms, and reflect on the human condition on a scale never before possible. Perhaps one of the most profound legacies of the printing press is the modern concept of freedom of expression. By making printed material widely available, the press allowed for a broader exchange of ideas and fostered a culture of debate and discussion. As knowledge became more accessible, individuals were able to question the status quo and seek new ways of thinking about government, society, and human rights. Over time, this laid the foundation for the development of free press laws and the advocacy for the protection of speech that continues to be a core element of democratic societies today. The technological advancements inspired by the printing press are also noteworthy. As the demand for books grew, so did the need for more efficient printing techniques. Gutenberg's press was only the beginning. The printing process evolved with innovations such as woodcut illustrations, engraving, and eventually the steam-powered printing press in the 19th century. These advancements allowed for mass production of books, newspapers, and pamphlets, which not only contributed to the expansion of knowledge, but also helped fuel the rise of modern mass media. Yet, the printing press's legacy is not without its darker side. Just as it enabled the spread of new ideas that fueled scientific progress and religious reformation, it also facilitated the rapid spread of misinformation and propaganda. Political pamphlets and religious tracts could be disseminated just as quickly as ideas for reform. Throughout history, governments, religious institutions, and then other groups have exploited the power of the press to control narratives, manipulate public opinion, and suppress dissent. The issue of censorship also became prevalent with the rise of print. Monarchs, the church, and then other powerful institutions began to realize that they had to regulate what was being printed to prevent the spread of subversive ideas. In fact, the idea of book banning became widespread, with governments and religious authorities attempting to control the flow of printed materials that might challenge the status quo. In modern times, the legacy of the printing press can be seen in digital publishing and the internet, which has revolutionized communication once again. Today, information is more freely available than ever before, thanks to the same principles of mass communication that began with Gutenberg's press. Just as the printing press opened up the possibility for the spread of knowledge in the 15th century, the internet has democratized access to ideas, news, and education, allowing anyone with an internet connection to participate in the global conversation. At the same time, the digital age also raises concerns similar to those faced by early printers: the spread of false information and unregulated content. As Gutenberg's press revolutionized access to knowledge, it also raised questions about the authenticity and control of information, which remain highly relevant today in the context of social media and the spread of misinformation. A lasting legacy. How the printing press changed the course of history. In the end, the printing press was more than just a tool for publishing books. It was an instrument that redefined the flow of information in human history, from its transformative effects on religion, politics, and literature, to its lasting influence on the democratization of knowledge. The printing press is one of the most consequential inventions in human history. As we reflect on its legacy, we see how it made the world more interconnected, more informed, and, ultimately, more able to share knowledge than ever before. The press opened the door for public engagement and intellectual exchange on a global scale, an influence that continues to shape the way we learn, communicate, and interact with each other today. The printing press was the first true information revolution, and it continues to inspire the innovations that define our modern age. As we navigate an increasingly complex world of digital information, it's essential to remember that the foundations of our connected world were laid by a simple yet profound invention. Gutenberg's printing press, the watermill, harnessing nature to power medieval industry. Imagine walking through the medieval countryside, where a large wooden structure suddenly catches your eye, a watermill. It stands beside a fast-flowing river, its wheels turning with the current, and you can hear the rhythmic clatter of the millstone grinding grain. The watermill may seem like a simple piece of machinery, but it was one of the most revolutionary inventions of the medieval period, having a profound effect on agriculture, industry, and even society. Watermills harnessed the power of flowing water to perform work that would otherwise require human or animal labor. The technology, which began to spread across Europe during the early medieval period, represented a significant leap forward in how people interacted with nature and harnessed its forces. Watermills were used primarily for grinding grain, but their applications would soon expand to include sawmills, fulling mills, and even the production of iron. Before the watermill, manual labor was the primary means of grinding grain. Millers would manually turn a grindstone, often assisted by animals or human labor, to break down wheat or barley into flour. The process was slow, labor-intensive, and inefficient, particularly as populations grew and the demand for food increased. For centuries, this system remained largely unchanged, but the introduction of the watermill began to revolutionize grain milling. The earliest watermills in medieval Europe were powered by rivers or streams, which provided the constant flow of water needed to turn the mill's wheel. The water wheel was connected to a series of gears and cogs, which transferred the water's energy to the grinding stones, making it possible to mill large quantities of grain with far less effort than manual labor ever could. This water-powered grinding was significantly more efficient, and it meant that millers could produce more flour in less time, helping to feed larger populations. But what made the watermill so revolutionary? How did it come to have such a profound impact on medieval society? And why did it spread so quickly across Europe, becoming a staple of rural life and contributing to the growth of medieval economies? The answer lies in the combination of practical utility and technological innovation. The watermill provided a self-sustaining source of power that did not require additional fuel. Unlike the windmill or the use of animals, it allowed for continuous, uninterrupted work, harnessing the natural flow of rivers and streams to power an entire industrial process. Its efficiency and sustainability made it an ideal solution for agricultural societies, which were dependent on grain production as the backbone of their economy. Watermills also represented an early form of industrialization. As the medieval population grew, the demand for food increased, and more efficient agricultural and milling methods were needed to meet that demand. The watermill was one of the earliest signs of the growing division of labor and specialization in medieval society. Instead of a single farmer grinding his own grain by hand, the advent of watermills allowed for the creation of dedicated milling centers where multiple farmers could bring their grain to be processed. But the watermill's significance went far beyond food production. In the centuries to come, its applications would expand to other areas, significantly influencing the development of industry and technology in the medieval world. As the medieval world continued to grow and evolve, the watermill began to take on an increasingly important role in shaping industrial practices across Europe. Initially, its primary application was for grinding grain, a necessity for feeding growing populations. But over time, watermills expanded their reach into other areas of production, including sawmills, fulling mills, and iron production. Each of these new uses of water power brought about profound changes in the economy, technology, and the very structure of medieval society. The first significant step in the expansion of the watermill's use was its adaptation to sawmills. Before the advent of water-powered sawmills, the cutting of timber was a labor-intensive process, relying on human or animal-powered tools. In the forests of medieval Europe, this was a limiting factor, especially as demand for wood for construction, shipbuilding, and fuel grew. The introduction of the water-powered sawmill revolutionized timber production. Water wheels could now drive saw blades that would cut through logs with greater speed and precision than ever before, significantly increasing timber output. This innovation was particularly crucial for the medieval construction boom, as large amounts of timber were needed for building castles, ships, houses, and churches. Another important application of the watermill was in the fulling mill, which helped to process wool into cloth. Fulling, the process of cleaning and thickening wool, was traditionally done by foot, with workers stomping on the wool to remove oils and impurities. This process was not only slow, but also exhausting. The introduction of water-powered fulling mills allowed for the rapid and efficient processing of wool, making it possible to produce large quantities of fabric for clothing, tapestries, and other goods. This innovation was significant for the growth of the textile industry, which became one of the most important economic sectors in medieval Europe. In addition to grain, timber, and wool, the watermill also had an applications in the iron industry. Watermills began to be used to power hammers and bellows, which were essential for forging iron. The ability to produce more iron more efficiently played a key role in the expansion of the iron industry, providing the raw materials needed for tools, weapons, armor, and construction. This in turn contributed to the development of the medieval economy. As more goods became available for trade and production, the versatility of the watermill allowed it to adapt to a wide range of needs, from basic food production to advanced industrial applications. Its power to drive machines made it a catalyst for the growth of medieval industry. It was not just a tool for individual farmers or small-scale enterprises. It was a force that enabled the creation of industrial centers. These centers, often located near rivers or streams, became hubs of production where goods were processed, refined, and manufactured. The watermill was a driving force behind the medieval economy, supporting industries that would help pave the way for the Industrial Revolution centuries later. The spread of watermills throughout Europe also had a significant impact on the social structure of medieval society. The rise of industrial centers meant that people were increasingly specialized in their work. Milling, once a task done by farmers as part of their daily routine, now became a specialized profession carried out by millers who operated the watermills. This led to the growth of a new class of skilled laborers and artisans, whose work was essential to the functioning of the economy. Watermills also played a significant role in the growth of trade. As milling centers began to multiply, the goods that were produced, whether it was flour, cloth, or timber, could be transported to other towns and markets. The ability to produce goods in greater quantities and at a lower cost meant that trade could expand across Europe, facilitating the exchange of raw materials, manufactured goods, and luxury items. Watermills, in many ways, became the foundation for a wider trade network, helping to create the infrastructure for a growing European market economy. But how did the watermill become so widespread? What factors contributed to the rapid adoption of this technology across medieval Europe? The answer lies in the unique blend of natural resources and technological innovation. Rivers and streams, essential for the operation of watermills, were abundant across much of Europe, and the spread of this technology was facilitated by the availability of water sources. Additionally, the growth of urban centers and the expansion of trade networks created the demand for more efficient production methods. As local lords, kings, and merchants recognized the value of watermills in increasing productivity, the technology spread quickly across the continent, transforming Europe's agricultural and industrial landscape. The watermill, an ingenious invention of medieval Europe, played a pivotal role in shaping the economic and technological foundations of the modern world. While it was a significant innovation in the Middle Ages, its legacy extends far beyond its original purpose. The spread of watermills across Europe and their adaptation to a wide range of industries set the stage for the Industrial Revolution. The scientific advancements of later centuries and the modernization of global industrial systems. In the medieval period, the watermill's main use was in agriculture, textile production, timber processing, and ironworking, industries that were fundamental to the economy. By harnessing the power of running water, these mills replaced the need for human or animal labor, transforming production in ways that had previously been unimaginable. But the influence of the watermill was not confined to the medieval period. It laid the groundwork for the industrialized world that followed, opening the door to mechanization, mass production, and technological advancement. The Industrial Revolution, a direct descendant of watermill technology. The Industrial Revolution that took place from the late 18th century to the early 19th century was, in many ways, a direct consequence of the early mechanization pioneered by the watermill. By providing a reliable and efficient source of power, the watermill demonstrated the potential of mechanical systems that could replace manual labor. This principle would later be applied to a wide variety of machinery during the Industrial Revolution, where steam engines and factories would take over tasks once done by hand or by animals. In the centuries following the medieval period, the principles of harnessing natural energy for industrial work were applied to the development of the steam engine. The steam engine, which powered the rise of factories, transportation systems, and mass production, was built on ideas that had been pioneered with watermills. Both systems involved energy conversion. The watermill converted the kinetic energy of flowing water into mechanical work, and the steam engine converted the energy of steam into mechanical power. The transition from water-powered mills to steam-powered engines was a logical progression as urbanization increased and natural water sources were not always available to power mills. Steam engines offered an alternative, making it possible to industrialize even areas that lacked rivers or streams. Steam engines became the backbone of the Industrial Revolution, but it is important to recognize that their success was built upon centuries of technological advancements, many of which were pioneered by the humble watermill. Moreover, the spread of mechanical devices in the form of watermills allowed for more complex manufacturing systems to emerge. As industries grew in size and scope, they needed more power, more innovation, and greater efficiency. The introduction of watermills helped foster a culture of experimentation and innovation, as skilled artisans and engineers sought new ways to harness natural forces and turn them into economic power. The role of watermills in shaping modern industrial infrastructure. The infrastructure that supports modern industry factories, power grids, and mechanized production lines is also rooted in the principles first established by the watermill. Water-driven machines, such as sawmills, fulling mills, and ironworks were the precursors to the large-scale industrial facilities that would later dominate the landscape during the Industrial Revolution. While the technology itself changed over time, the principle of harnessing natural power for industrial work remained a constant. The watermill set the standard for centralized power systems in industrial settings, where energy was provided to a series of machines via a centralized power source. Today, we see this concept applied in modern power plants, whether they are powered by hydroelectric dams, coal, gas, or nuclear energy. The development of these energy systems owes much to the early water-driven power sources that were used in medieval mills. Furthermore, the rise of hydroelectric power plants in the 19th and 20th centuries is a modern-day reflection of the same basic principle, using the force of water to generate power. In many ways, the modern world's reliance on water for clean, renewable energy is a continuation of the legacy of the watermill. The ability to harness natural resources for energy is now more critical than ever. As the world seeks sustainable solutions to meet growing demands for power, the lessons learned from medieval watermills are not only foundational to industrial history, but are also relevant in our ongoing efforts to create eco-friendly technologies. Environmental considerations. The watermill and sustainability. The watermill was, in its time, a model of environmentally sustainable technology. It utilized the natural flow of water, a renewable resource, to power machinery, leaving little environmental impact. This aspect of watermill technology is particularly significant when we consider the modern world's struggles with resource depletion and the environmental effects of fossil fuels. As the world faces the growing challenge of climate change and the need for sustainable energy, we are once again looking to water as a clean, renewable resource. The principles established by medieval watermills are still applied today in hydropower and small scale hydroelectric projects, which aim to provide energy with minimal environmental impact. The medieval watermill thus stands as a symbol of sustainable innovation, a reminder that nature can be harnessed for human use in ways that benefit both society and the environment. As the world turns its attention to renewable energy sources, we can look back at the success of watermills and draw inspiration for modern solutions to our energy and environmental challenges. The cultural legacy of the watermill. Beyond its technical and industrial contributions, the watermill also left an indelible mark on medieval culture and society. In many ways, the watermill became a symbol of community and progress. In the medieval world, watermills were often shared resources managed by local lords, monasteries, or guilds who provided access to them for nearby farmers and artisans. They were central to the local economy, and their presence marked the development of trade and the growth of villages into towns. Watermills also appeared frequently in medieval art and literature, symbolizing the growth of industry and the changing landscape of the countryside. They became iconic in the minds of medieval peasants and townspeople, representing both the power of nature and the ingenuity of human engineering. The medieval miller, who operated the watermill, became a fixture in literature and folklore, often portrayed as a hard-working, community-centered figure who played a vital role in the economy of his time. As we look at the continued importance of watermills in modern history, it's clear that their impact extends far beyond their role in medieval agriculture. The watermill is both a cultural icon and a practical legacy, marking the transition from agrarian societies to industrial economies, and continuing to shape our modern understanding of energy and sustainability. The crossbow, a technological leap in medieval warfare. Picture yourself standing on the battlefield of medieval Europe. The air is thick with tension as opposing forces prepare for combat. You are a soldier, equipped not with the traditional sword and shield, but with a crossbow, a weapon that is silent, powerful, and devastatingly accurate. The crossbow, one of the most revolutionary weapons of the medieval period, has radically changed the way wars are fought. And you are about to experience firsthand the power it brings to the battlefield. The crossbow's origins can be traced back to ancient China, but it was during the medieval period in Europe that it truly evolved into the weapon that would reshape the course of European warfare. Its rise in popularity, particularly from the 11th century onward, was driven by several factors, including its ease of use, power, and the relative simplicity of training soldiers to use it effectively. Unlike the traditional longbow, which required years of training and skill to use effectively, the crossbow was much more user-friendly. It required far less physical strength and technique to operate, which made it a democratizing weapon. Peasants and soldiers with little to no formal training could use it effectively after just a few days of instruction. This fact alone gave the crossbow a huge advantage on the medieval battlefield, where armies were often composed of levies and militia who had little experience in warfare. The mechanism of the crossbow was deceptively simple. It featured a horizontal bow mounted on a stock and a trigger mechanism that allowed the shooter to release the tension on the string when the trigger was pulled. The string snapped forward, releasing a bolt of short, heavy projectile at the target with great speed and force. The crossbow's ability to deliver powerful, accurate shots made it a formidable weapon, capable of penetrating armor and causing massive damage. But how did this seemingly simple invention have such a profound impact on medieval warfare? Why did it come to dominate the battlefield? And what made it different from the traditional weapons that had been used for centuries, such as the sword and spear? The crossbow's advantage lay in its ability to pierce armor. As the medieval period progressed, knights and soldiers began wearing increasingly heavier and more sophisticated armor, including chainmail and plate armor. These developments made it difficult for traditional weapons, like swords or arrows, to cause significant damage. The crossbow, however, with its short, heavy bolts and immense force, could pierce through these defenses, making it an ideal weapon for countering heavily armored knights. In addition to its power, the crossbow's range and accuracy were key factors in its success. The longbow could match the crossbow in range, but the crossbow's bolts were much more precise. Skilled archers could fire arrows with a longbow, but they required years of practice to achieve a high level of proficiency. In contrast, crossbowmen could achieve similar accuracy after just a short period of training. This made the crossbow an essential weapon for both siege warfare and field battles, where precision was critical in turning the tide of conflict. The introduction of the crossbow also had significant strategic implications. Armies could field crossbowmen alongside infantry, creating a combined arms approach that leveraged the strengths of both ranged and melee units. In siege warfare, the crossbow was invaluable for breaching fortifications, as the powerful bolts could damage the wooden structures of a castle or penetrate the defensive walls. Furthermore, its accuracy allowed for effective suppressive fire, forcing enemy soldiers to take cover or retreat. But the crossbow's impact on medieval warfare was not just technological, it was also political. The crossbow was a weapon that could be wielded by nearly anyone, meaning that military power was no longer solely in the hands of the elite class of knights. In many ways, it was a weapon of the common people, which contributed to the democratization of medieval warfare. The crossbowmen of the medieval period were often recruited from the lower classes, and their rise to prominence on the battlefield marked a shift in the social and military dynamics of Europe. As the crossbow gained popularity throughout medieval Europe, it began to revolutionize the way battles were fought, particularly in siege warfare. One of the defining features of medieval combat was the use of castles and fortifications, which were built to withstand attacks from enemy forces. However, with the introduction of the crossbow, the very nature of siege tactics was transformed. Before the crossbow, attacking a fortified position often meant relying on siege engines such as catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams machines that could cause massive destruction but required substantial time, resources, and manpower to operate. These siege engines were effective at breaking down walls or hurling projectiles over the castle's defenses, but they were slow and vulnerable to counterattack. The crossbow, on the other hand, was a lightweight and highly accurate weapon that could be used by infantry to attack from a distance, making it an ideal tool for siege warfare. One of the most significant advantages of the crossbow in siege warfare was its ability to penetrate armor, Castles were often protected by heavily armored defenders, and their armor, typically made of plate metal or chainmail, was designed to withstand arrows and swords. The heavy bolts fired from crossbows, however, could pierce through these defenses with remarkable power. This made crossbowmen invaluable during sieges, as they could shoot at defenders from behind cover or from a distance, causing significant casualties and weakening the defender's resolve. Crossbowmen often played a crucial role in the storming of castles. They would be stationed on the siege lines or atop siege towers, using their weapons to harass and wear down defenders before the main assault began. During a siege, crossbowmen would target vulnerable areas, such as the heads or exposed limbs of defenders, and could also shoot at the siege engines used by the defending forces, destroying or disabling them. This combination of range, accuracy, and penetrative power made the crossbow an indispensable part of siege warfare beyond the walls of the castle. The crossbow was also used to great effect in field battles. In these engagements, the crossbow offered the advantage of precision over the more traditional longbow. While a skilled archer could launch arrows with impressive range and speed, the crossbow was more accurate, even at longer distances. This precision was critical in battle, where hitting specific targets, such as enemy commanders, archers, or knights, could have a significant impact on the outcome. Crossbowmen were often deployed in ranks or units within armies, and they were strategically placed to maximize their effectiveness. One of the key tactics involved the use of crossbowmen in a supporting role, providing covering fire while heavier infantry or cavalry engaged the enemy. This allowed armies to balance the strengths of close combat with the devastating long-range power of crossbowmen. The crossbow's introduction also played a role in the development of military formations. As armies began to rely more on crossbowmen, they adapted their strategies to integrate this new technology. Crossbowmen would often be stationed in the back lines of an army, protected by infantry, and would fire upon enemy units from a distance. The crossbowmen could fire in volleys, overwhelming the enemy with rapid, precise shots. These tactics forced opponents to rethink their battle strategies, as crossbowmen could neutralize the enemy cavalry or infantry before they even reached the front lines. As medieval warfare evolved, so did the use of the crossbow. The growing importance of crossbowmen in battles led to the development of specialized equipment to improve their effectiveness. Crossbowmen began to use more advanced mechanisms, such as windlasses and cranks, to help cock the weapon more easily. This allowed them to fire faster and with greater power. The rise of crossbowmen also had a significant impact on fortifications, castles, and other fortified structures, which had once been designed primarily to resist traditional arrows or spears, now had to account for the greater threat posed by the powerful bolts fired from crossbows. Engineers began to modify castle designs to counteract the threat posed by crossbowmen, creating stronger, more reinforced parapets and walls to withstand the high-impact bolts. The crossbow and the rise of professional armies. The widespread adoption of the crossbow had a far-reaching impact, not just on tactics and warfare, but on the very structure of medieval armies. Before the crossbow, armies were often made up of feudal levies, where knights and professional soldiers made up the elite fighting force, while peasants and common folk were called upon to serve in times of war, but lacked formal training. The introduction of the crossbow, however, helped democratize military service, since the crossbow was easier to use than the longbow and required far less training. It opened the door for common soldiers to participate in the professional army. Crossbowmen could be trained relatively quickly, making it easier for kings and nobles to raise large standing armies without relying solely on the traditional warrior class. This shift in military recruitment contributed to the rise of professional armies, a key development in the evolution of warfare. Armies were no longer exclusively made up of nobles and knights. Now, they could be composed of trained infantry armed with powerful weapons like the crossbow. This shift to standing armies allowed for the development of more organized, efficient military units that could be deployed quickly and effectively. The rise of professional crossbowmen also contributed to the end of the dominance of knights on the battlefield. While knights in plate armor had long been the symbol of medieval warfare, their vulnerability to crossbows gradually diminished their effectiveness. With the growing power of crossbowmen, knights were no longer the only formidable force on the battlefield. Instead, infantry units, including crossbowmen, became just as important, if not more so, in determining the outcome of battles. The crossbow and its decline with gunpowder weapons. Despite its widespread use, the crossbow eventually began to lose its prominence as gunpowder weapons emerged in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. The firearm, with its greater range and power, soon surpassed the crossbow in terms of effectiveness. Gunpowder weapons, such as early hand cannons and muskets, were able to fire projectiles that could penetrate armor with ease, much like the crossbow, but they also offered faster rates of fire and greater mobility. The crossbow's decline was accelerated by the development of firearms, which were easier to use and required less training. By the 16th century, crossbowmen were gradually replaced by gunpowder infantry in most armies, as firearms became the dominant force on the battlefield. However, the crossbow never truly disappeared. It remained in use, particularly in siege warfare and in certain regions of Europe, until the 17th century. Even after its decline, the crossbow left a lasting legacy in military history. The principles of range, accuracy, and piercing power that made the crossbow effective were integrated into the design of later firearms, continuing to influence weapon development for centuries to come. The crossbow's legacy extends far beyond the medieval battlefield, influencing the development of modern weaponry and the course of military history. While it gradually gave way to firearms during the Renaissance and the early modern period, the crossbow laid the groundwork for advancements in military technology, contributing to the rise of professional armies, the development of modern firearms, and even the cultural image of warfare that persists today. The crossbow's revolutionary nature lay in its democratizing effect on medieval armies. As a weapon of mass warfare, the crossbow allowed for the mobilization of ordinary people, peasants, and commoners into skilled military units. Prior to the crossbow, the longbow was the dominant ranged weapon, but it required years of training and skill to master. The crossbow, in contrast, was much easier to use, allowing a greater number of soldiers to be trained quickly. The simplicity of the crossbow meant that anyone could become proficient in a matter of days, making it an ideal weapon for armies that needed to recruit large numbers of soldiers in a short period. The use of crossbowmen in professional armies marked a shift in medieval military structure The rise of standing armies professional, full-time military units that could be called upon at any time was one of the key transformations of the late medieval and early modern period. The crossbow played a significant role in this transformation, as it was one of the first weapons that enabled large-scale mass recruitment of soldiers for sustained military campaigns. This move toward professional armies and standing forces also helped to centralize power in the hands of kings and monarchs. As rulers began to recruit and maintain professional crossbowmen and other infantry, they reduced their dependence on feudal levies, marking a shift toward more centralized military power. This had broad implications for the political landscape of Europe, contributing to the rise of nation-states and the decline of the feudal system. However, as the 15th and 16th centuries progressed, the crossbow began to be replaced by firearms, which offered even greater power and efficiency. Firearms could be used with even less training than the crossbow, and they were far more effective against the heavily armored knights that had long dominated the battlefield. Early firearms, such as the muskets and arquebuses, used gunpowder to fire bullets, which made them capable of piercing armor, something the crossbow, despite its power, struggled to do as effectively. The rifling of gun barrels, which emerged in the 16th century, increased the accuracy and range of firearms, further diminishing the crossbow's role in battle. Despite its decline as a weapon of war, the crossbow's influence on military tactics and weaponry remain. The principles of range, accuracy, and piercing power that made the crossbow so effective on the medieval battlefield were incorporated into the design of modern firearms, including the musket and rifle. Additionally, the crossbow's ability to fire projectiles from a relatively stationary position without requiring the same physical strength and years of training as a longbow was adopted in the design of modern artillery, which also focused on precision, range, and the efficient use of gunpowder. Another enduring legacy of the crossbow is its cultural significance in shaping the image of medieval warfare. The crossbow, along with the longbow and sword, became iconic weapons in the romanticized version of medieval knights and chivalry that emerged during the Renaissance and continues to influence modern perceptions of the medieval era. The crossbow is often depicted in medieval literature, art, and films, symbolizing both the power of technology and the militarization of society. Its image as a weapon of both efficiency and democracy made it an enduring symbol of the rise of professional modern armies. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the crossbow also made its way into modern recreational activities. While its use in warfare ceased, the crossbow became popular in sports and hunting. The modern crossbow is significantly more powerful than its medieval counterpart, utilizing materials such as carbon fiber and synthetic fibers to improve its strength and accuracy. The crossbow is still used in archery competitions, and it is also a popular tool for hunting, offering an alternative to firearms with the same range and precision. The crossbow in the modern era, a cultural and sporting icon. Even as the crossbow faded from the military scene, it left a lasting legacy in sporting and recreation. Modern crossbow technology, while vastly different from the medieval versions, is still based on the basic principles that made the medieval weapon so effective. Today's crossbows feature mechanical triggers, improved limbs, and powerful drawstrings that allow for greater force and accuracy. In addition to recreational use, the crossbow's historical significance continues to be recognized in various historical reenactments, films, and literature, where it is often associated with the mystique and romance of the medieval knight. Films like The Lord of the Rings and Robin Hood feature crossbow-wielding characters, reminding audiences of the medieval role of the weapon in shaping the warrior archetype. The crossbow's symbolism of the medieval era lives on in modern pop culture, representing both the technological advancement of the period and the democratization of warfare. The idea that common soldiers, not just knights, could be effective in battle with the use of the crossbow has carried forward into modern views of military equality. The notion that effective weapons do not necessarily depend on strength or years of training, but rather on accessibility and efficiency. Reflection on the crossbow's influence on modern warfare. Looking back on the crossbow's journey from a simple mechanical device to an iconic military weapon, we see how it was a catalyst for change in the way warfare was conducted in medieval Europe. Its rise marked a shift from feudal warfare, where knights dominated the battlefield, to a more egalitarian approach, where infantry, armed with powerful, accessible weapons, played an equally significant role. The crossbow not only transformed military tactics and armament design, but it also contributed to the political and social transformations that would eventually lead to the end of feudalism and the rise of modern nation states. The crossbow's influence extends beyond just its military impact. It marked a shift in the relationship between technology and power, one that would continue to unfold with the development of modern firearms and industrial warfare. Today, the crossbow's legacy lives on in the continued evolution of weapons, technology, and military strategies, shaping the course of history from the medieval period to the modern era. As we come to the end of tonight's journey through history, it's a quiet reminder of the profound ways that technology and ingenuity shape our world. From the early hum of the watermill turning the rivers into power, to the precise force of the crossbow on the battlefield, each step forward in human innovation has quietly echoed through the ages, altering lives in ways we may never fully understand. But all these advances, small yet mighty, have helped create the world we know today. Now, as we close the pages of time, think for a moment on the simplicity and complexity of these changes. The tools and devices of the past might have seemed small at the time, but their ripples stretched far beyond their moment, creating the foundations for all that followed. And as the sun sets on our story tonight, know that each of these innovations, whether it's the pressing force of the printing press or the steady rhythm of the crossbow, whispered their way into the fabric of history, not in dramatic flashes, but in quiet, transformative ways. So, breathe deeply now. Let the soft hum of time pass through you as you reflect on how far we've come and how the past lingers gently in our present. Let your thoughts drift as you find rest in the timeless flow of history. The day may fade, but the quiet echoes of these stories will remain, wrapped in the calm that has always been there, waiting for you to listen. Good night.